Hello, my soul-seeking friends. It's Shanna. Thank you so much for listening to Sense of Soul podcast. Enlightening conversations with like-minded souls from around the world, sharing their journey of finding their light within, turning pain into purpose, and awakening to their true sense of soul. If you like what you hear, show me some love and rate, like, and subscribe. And consider becoming a Sense of Soul Patreon member, where you will get ad-free episodes, monthly circles, and much more. Now go grab your coffee, open your mind, heart, and soul. It's time to awaken. Hey, it's Shanna. Today on Sense of Soul, I have two very special guests, Daniel Morse and Diana Kelly. Daniel Morse is a depth psychotherapist and a Gnostic scholar. He's also the author of The Divine Spark Within, Excavating the Mysteries of Sophia and the Deep Christ. Diana Marie Kelly is a spiritual teacher, mentor, and healer. Diana is a teacher of the ancient Holy Womb Chakra System, and she specializes in life-changing emotional healing and Lightbody Activations. Both Dan and Diana have been a huge part of my Sophia journey. Together, they have taught beautiful courses on Sophia, and I have learned so much from both of them. And it's my honor today to have them with us to bring to you Gnosis of the Holy High Sophia.
No.
Hi there, Shanna.
How you doing?
We're good. Really good.
A lot of my listeners have probably heard both of your individual episodes, but Dan, it's been a long time since I've had you on. So just to remind everybody who you are, I had you on, gosh, it's probably been almost 2 years ago.
Fairly shortly after my book was published.
Yeah.
And you got one of the earlier copies. And
I did. You're right.
The page popped out on you from the bridal chamber. And which was great, because it was like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't read all that other stuff, just get to the heart of it. So Dan Morse and Northern California, grew up in the East Coast in Massachusetts, and we both have fled, Diana and I have both fled the East Coast to come to the land, to the wild, wild West here. And yeah, just been on a journey, I guess, a psycho-spiritual exploration of sorts, where I professionally got into the depth psychology and Jung, and went to the Pacifica Graduate Institute and became licensed and have been a therapist for many years. But then there's also this other sort of side to me where I kind of try to keep the two separate to some degree, because my spiritual side can be a bit out there, and I'm trying to maintain a professional persona. But less and less so, because the two are increasingly becoming intertwined. Mm-hmm. And since a younger age, having a real interest in the name Sophia as a sort of a generic goddess of wisdom, who I turn to as a sort of a beacon, where I wanted to hold on to the purity, might be a word, and the innocence that I experienced as a child. And that my connecting in on that deeper child self that is always there, it's not just a child, ultimately led me into studying the Gnostic texts, where the name Sophia was a kind of a guide into this like excavation, as I call it, into the texts, the early Gnostic texts, but that also dovetail with the Kabbalah, and also some of the Sufi and Persian mystical traditions. So my book is really a outcome of years and years of research and work. I recently moved out of my storage shed, and I've got all these old journals and papers, and I found an old book in here, and it laid out the whole outline of the book, just right there from like 10 years ago. Mm. So it's been incubating and working me. It's a living myth. The creation story of Sophia is a living myth that is just a tremendous meta story that I think is so relevant and so valuable in this times.
Your class that you did on Sophia, I heard you say we need a new myth.
Joseph Campbell really was one during his talks with Bill Moyers many years ago, was saying we need a new myth.
Yeah.
That the myth is something that can unite us as a global village. I was doing some recent reading on Jung, and he's also saying that essentially the figure of Sophia is something that it's bringing an old story into the new. Mm-hmm. And that is literally seeding the new humanity, the new culture that we're also working towards building here. Sophia is a very significant figure in the depth tradition that we can turn to. So, and of course, Diana has her own very profound relationship to Sophia.
Yeah, I love the dynamic between the two of you because you both have a piece of my brain. Okay. Because my need to know part, Dan, you have helped me, and I definitely recommend your book because it's receivable. Like I could sit and read this whole book and get it and understand, where I might have to go to thousands of books over here to get all of that information. So it's all there. And I love it. Thank you for that.
It all really
and
well.
Then, yeah. I mean, for me, where I was at, I mean, it just helped my brain so much. Thank you. And then Diana, my spiritual side and experiences, I really connect with you. And I love that we kind of both came into this journey very similar, not really knowing the things that are in Dan's book.
Right. So, yeah, it's just a little bit for me is, I mean, I did have experiences with Sophia, as you know, from the class. And in 2014, when she came into San Francisco, into my room in San Francisco, I felt like, you know, I have felt since that time this responsibility to help seed her back into the psyche of humanity. And so that's what I, you know, succinctly call my mission, but to be a voice for her. And that's here on this podcast and in many, all small ways, big ways, wherever it's called.
You know, and I also love you and Dan went on kind of a pilgrimage last year to France. Mm-hmm. And, you know, throughout your journey, all of those things kind of like bloomed when you were there in France.
I was aware of that these images that are found on the earliest of the Gothic cathedrals around Paris seemed to suggest the creation story and the mythos of Sophia. That the coronation in particular was a motif that I think, as far as we know, arose out of these early Gothic cathedrals. There's no real earlier images of the crowning of the Virgin, as they call it, the coronation of the Virgin. And this sort of has led to a thesis and our exploration into the role that the Templars had at the earliest stages of the development of these cathedrals, and what they were tapped into, having come from Jerusalem, potentially with texts that are associated with this mystery tradition. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking at the various cathedrals, especially around this coronation theme. And we went to Reims Cathedral, the cathedral that many of the French royalty were crowned in their coronation to become kings. But we had this.
I had the experience of sitting in the seventh row from the back on the left while you're sitting looking at the altar, and had like a band, I'll say, feel like it was tightening around my head like a crown, and then a burning on the interior, a really like a bad sunburn. It felt like I was getting. And then the energy began to move down. But at that point, I think by the time we left Reims, it maybe had moved down to a little bit below my heart chakra. And then I had different experiences going to different places until finally at Avebury in England. It went back. But there were so many peak experiences on that trip. I mean, with Chartres, the goal was to be walking the labyrinth. It's only open on Fridays and not every Friday. So we planned the trip around being able to walk that. But I just cried at Chartres. And right before that, we had been in London and we had gone to the first Templar church in England. Am I right about that?
It was the Templars built their primary church and location in London that is now it's called the Templar, or the Temple Quarter, the Temple region of London. But there's a Templar church. It's a round church, and there's effigies, and there's a whole story about the Templars coming to England right around 1128, 1129, during this whole period after they came back from Jerusalem. And this is the beginning of the rise of the early Gothic cathedrals. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you were saying.
So, we were there first, and then we went to France, and we went to Chartres Cathedral, and the impact, I was tapping into so much, but I think just great reverence and honor for the Templars, for what they brought back from those excavations in Jerusalem. And how all of a sudden after that, all these cathedrals started going up and having a lot of these images, which were encoded, that primarily Dan was decoding. But, it was so profound. And we spent in that square, we spent like 48 hours, I think. We didn't leave for at least 36 or 48 hours. We just spent there. We didn't use the car or anything. We just like walking there in and out of the cathedral, watching, all sorts of things and experiencing all sorts of things. But I think we were there 17 days. I think I cried 16, 15 years.
The whole time. So basically what you guys are saying is that there was lots of evidence in the architecture all around Europe and in these areas that the Templar had known about at least the Priestess Sophia, because it kind of shows the story in many ways. It's
essentially reverse engineering, seeing the images and beginning to sort of try to trace the story of what might have happened. And there's no proof here, and it's a thesis, really. But the timeline seems to line up. Saint Bernard was a very key figure in Paris and in France as the primary bishop or cleric, who was key in both the origination of this new architectural development called Gothic and the formation of the Templars. Bernard of Clairvaux was essentially the patron, the religious figure that helped to establish the Knights Templar. Just the origins of the Templar, really a group of people who were connected together by family that I think somehow got wind. Once the crusade got into Jerusalem and the Christians sort of took over it from the Turks and they reclaimed it, and then they could go there. The Templars, 9 of them, set themselves up in the Al-Aqsa Mosque area, and they were very likely doing these excavations for like 9 years. They came back, and when they came back, there was a kind of an explosion of a renaissance that was spurred. And part of it was these Gothic cathedrals, and also, by the way, the Kabbalah. This is the region where in Troyes, and the Grail legends. These are all being spurred out from this early 12th century, and so it's the images that were put on the Gothic cathedrals, especially in the front entrances and the doorways and the tympanum, these archways, and they can posture as images to Mary, Mother Mary. But Mother Mary, we think, was a kind of a cryptic stand-in for Sophia. There's another theme, especially found on Notre Dame in Paris, the amazing, high, just beautiful, gorgeous cathedral in l'Île de Paris or l'Île de France, the island in Paris there, and Notre Dame. And so there's 2 figures, a synagoga and ecclesia. Synagoga is a very dramatic image supposedly representing the failure of Judaism. And it's a woman, and her crown has fallen, and she has a snake wrapped around her head. And with the snake's head on top of her head, on her crown chakra, hissing. And she's looking down. And then on the other side of this doorway, this central west portal, the main entrance to Notre Dame, is ecclesia. It's supposed to represent Christianity and, the rise of the church and the triumph of the church. So she has her crown on. She's holding a grail, a chalice. She has this staff. And we think that based on a reading and a sort of an unpacking of that whole central doorway, that it's the Christ emerges from the region of the right down into the region of the left to rescue the fallen Sophia, who's been trapped by the archonic snake, reptilian, whatever, that the lion-headed snake figure that is talked about in the texts, and that she is restored and rescued. And we think that the Templars knew this story and that they were cryptically sort of weaving it in a way that wasn't easily decoded.
Obvious. Right.
Yeah.
And yet so here we are, that actually to decode it is an incredible validation of the value, the significance of this mythos of Sophia and the Christ and Sophia. Who is the Christ and Sophia? And that's all excised out of the Bible and Christianity. They said, no, we don't want any of that,
And also the guy who translated the Dead Sea Scroll, he also saw many different texts were actually coded in a way that they were used backwards. And that when the Knights of Templar had said, they asked him under terrible torture, who are you worshiping? They said Baphomet, which backwards is Sophia in that code.
Yeah, it was a code that they used to cryptically send messages, and that some suggest there was one interpretation of the Baphomet, say a worship of some head that maybe is identified with Sophia. But I think it's also the Templars were really connected with Mary Magdalene and the divine feminine, and they really were protectors and champions of the restoration of the feminine.
Dan, there's often times as well, and I think you shared a picture when you guys were there. I don't know which church, but a lot of times goddesses and also gods in many different cultures are standing on top of a lion.
Right, yeah.
Which, of course, in the Sophia myth, Yaldabaoth.
I think we have to be very careful as we're delving into ancient goddess traditions. And I have to say that there is a episode on Gaia focusing on the Gnostics. And we're very uncomfortable with the conclusions that they draw and the approach that they take in delving into the Gnostic themes, because they go into the Sumerian texts. And they're saying the Sumerian texts sort of preceded and are feeders for this Gnostic tradition. And based on my understanding, that the Sumerian texts with Enki and Enlil and Inanna and the lion, this goddess in this tradition is often sort of has a lion, and the goddess connected with the lion on the gates of Babylon, I think there's this beautiful images of a lion. But that's another whole other stream of ancient mythology. And my sort of thesis in the book is that because Christ came from such a tremendously high level of source creation, his Christ self, his high self, was so highly connected. He was seeing it on a whole other level beyond the Sumerians, whoever the Sumerians were, 3,000, 4,000, 100,000, and whoever they were with their ziggurats, and that cosmology of the Sumerians feeding into the Greek cosmology and the 12 of the Pantheon, and all of that is different from the high holy pronoia. The source goddess, Holy Spirit emanation, and the consort of Sophia and Christ, and the seeding of the divine form, that this cosmology seems to have originated from this deep Christ, I call him, this Christ figure who's spoken about in the Gnostic text, in a much more elaborate way. And so, so I think we have to be careful when talking about imagery associated with the goddess. In this Gaia TV show, they quote unquote have Sophia linked with this sort of reptilian goddess figure. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. No, let's slow down here.
It was surprising to see for me too, because that's not my experience, and I'm sure it's not your experience, right?
I watch things and I do it just to find out, what people say or whatever. But when it comes down to Holy Sophia, the lover of Sophia, it is a deep love that I have. And I know that you share that as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a lot of people, I'm sure, who have negativa, which is something we talked about in the class that you guys held, that negativa, which is also a lesson learner too.
Sure, absolutely. It all is, right? Well, the cauldron for firing of the diamond.
Yeah, it's so true.
I think, it's like Diana's voice is working to anchor this Sophia energetic and this Sophia vibration here. Yeah. And we've had such the pleasure of being part of different ceremonies and classes, and recently the Easter ceremony where Diana called in Sophia.
Mm-hmm. Tell me.
Tremendous.
Tell me. Does she have a message for us?
Yeah, and I know I said this before we actually got started. I do feel that there's just so much going on. We're at such a critical point on the planet. During this Easter service, which Christy Michaels puts on, she was also in the class. Okay. But what I said was my original message from her, my first message from her, had to do with what she said was people will need the mother in ways that we cannot yet understand. And this is 2014. So here we are 10 years later. I was left, even though she didn't specifically say, sometimes, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, like I almost feel like I get an impression. It's not so much the words, it's like what I'm left with. And she seemed somber, and the impression I felt was that it was going to have something to do with the 3 Abrahamic religions in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And here we are, right? And I don't think that any of us, as bad as things are, the Middle East has been a region in crisis for literally thousands of years. But this is like a new level that we're in. I feel, on the one hand, I see it as a ground zero for the awakening or breaking hearts open of humanity. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, it's so much suffering. It's so intense that I want to say, can we hurry up? Can we hurry this up and get this process over with? So we don't have to keep suffering this, and especially the people that are there, on ground zero, really going through the suffering.
So so it's the mother that is the common ground between the 3 Abrahamic religions.
Yes.
Mother Mary, definitely. Mm-hmm. I mean, at least between Islam and Christianity. Mother Mary figures prominently in Islam. In each of the 3 monotheistic religions, the mother has been, we become disconnected from the mother.
Right.
And so hence we have patriarchal gods, Yahweh, and then, and Allah, where in the name of God, atrocities are being, like they're all over. And And we have to be very careful talking about this because people's relationship to God is so important. Mm-hmm. And each person, of course, has their own right and their own relationship. It's a very personal. But I think what Diana is promoting is Sophia is a common source. Mm-hmm. And she is found in the Shekinah of the Jewish mystical tradition. She is found in the Sufi and the Persian Ishmaelian Gnostic system that's promoted so beautifully by Henry Corbin in his books and Ibn Arabi. There's the Sophia is so strong in there. And then, of course, in the Christian tradition, Sophia, we have to sort of like dig down to the earlier phases of it to sort of reclaim her. But then there's also in the Old Testament wisdom, who is wisdom? And I think the Song of Songs, I have an article on my website, sophiaproject.net, analyzing and unpacking the Song of Songs, where it's the Shulamite who's longing for her Lord, her light of lights, and they superimpose that it's Solomon, but I think it feels very, it's part of this whole, I think this flourishing of a new myth that emerged out of first century.
Wow. Okay. So Diana and I had talked one time about Flame of the Dove, because you have even this, this vision of this, and it kept coming up even after we had spoke about that. I mean, so much. I, was learning also about the different symbolism, that has represented Sophia, even the owl, because you guys mentioned you guys have an owl that's been hanging out with you. She's kind of that goddess of the night that navigates in the dark, in Dan's book, that divine spark, right, within all of us. And there's so much wisdom within all of these allegories. But they're playing out in today's world, which is what I find pretty amazing. I mean, I'm finding, just my simple accounts in the backyard end up being something I found, like I had sent you in the alchemical marriage, totally explained an experience I had. And so this is happening, and I don't think it's just happening to me. I just think that I was aware, and I'm fortunate to have sense of soul and be seeking in the way that I am, that I, come across this information. But I'm thinking that a lot of people, if they're able to be present, might also start to see that the divine feminine Sophia is trying to really come into all of our minds and in our hearts.
Absolutely. And I think you did make a reference to one of the things that I did see regarding the Middle East was the flames above the heads, and that there was a certain number of people that had to have the flames before this conflict can resolve. And because there's something like, I'm going to call it a heart-mind wisdom.
Yeah.
Sophia, and the flames were being put on by a dove in my vision. So,
which corresponds to the Pentecost.
Yes, it's a very classic Pentecost.
Paul's experience where the flames came to the heads of each person.
Right.
And
as the dove did.
Yeah. Like this is like a critical time, and we all know that. And but I do think it's like, in a sense, Sophia can come through the grief, the heartbreaking.
Yeah, true. I know.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people who reach out to me, and what is this? Is this really a possibility that there was a goddess and we were, kept from knowing this? And I'm like, yeah, there's many things that we've been kept from, but yeah, that's an important one.
Yeah.
But, people that I would never imagine, have, questions and are starting to, my whole household, now is a believer of Sophia, even my most tough ones around here. It's one thing to read about it in books, but when you start to experience it, there's lots of synchronicity. And also it's hidden in plain sight. That's, I guess, what I see as well. It's like everywhere all of a sudden.
That's where this poem by Mirabai,
Yeah, that
Mirabai Star about the
shared with you.
Shekinah
Yeah.
is so powerful.
Oh my gosh. Was that the one you sent me? Yeah, I
Yes.
was crying. Yeah.
I know.
And I had just gotten home. My car almost broke down. And I had to come home. And I was sitting on the couch, just like taking a breath because I was so aggravated. I couldn't go to my doctor's appointment. And you sent that, and I just start listening, and I just start just like letting it all go. And I just felt better. I felt at home. I think I even said to you, and I just start crying. You know, it is almost like that feeling like when you've had a bad day and you just want to run into your mom's arms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've been playing it. Well, when I was actually driving, I believe, I mean, I was stopped at a red light and I was like, I have to send this to Shanna now. Like now.
Thank you.
This is where the Shekinah and the Sophia are so
Yes.
intertwined, or there's so many cross references between the two. And I think Mirabai, is presenting the more of the classic Jewish interpretation, but it feels like it's been infused with some Kabbalah. The medieval surge of Kabbalah has some beautiful references to Sophia, the feminine. That's really where the feminine Shekinah begins to take hold. And she has, and the idea of the indwelling presence, light of the divine within us, that's so parallel to the divine spark within. Sophianic sparks, and the Jewish cosmology of the scattering of the shards of light in creation that became the Sephirot, the lowest of which, the Malkuth, in this world, is this feminine presence of the divine light here within us that we are being called to reactivate. And the idea of tikkun, at least in the Luriac Kabbalah, is associated with the regathering of the sparks.
In the path of that feminine and masculine, right, on the tree of life, and moving up kind of Jacob's ladder, and then to the Ein Sof, which, I mean, obviously, Sophia. I mean, it's half of Sophia, right?
Ein Sof being, equated with, in the Gnostic tradition, the ineffable. This source, out of which came this great emanation. So we have behind us this, on the video, this image.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Rose window of Shautra.
Yeah.
And that if the Templars were onto this cosmology, that this is the great emanation. And in the middle is Mary with the divine child, or the Anthropos. And Diana had a very powerful experience with that particular window.
Yeah. Before going to Shautra, I was doing some breath work. And during the breath work session, I saw that window move, and it just all the pieces moved around. Right. But I was seeing it through like water. And then when they all came back together, the water was gone and I was seeing it clear. Like you might look at a reflection.
This is over your heart?
Over my heart, right. But when I shared the experience with Dan, he said that often the pleroma, which is depicted by water, which is kind of like it differentiates like heaven and earth, let's say, the different realms. So the fact so it helped me to understand what was happening. So at first I'm looking down on my own heart, seeing the image, but it's like you would look at a reflection in water. And then the water, when that happened, the water was gone. So it was clear.
So somehow perhaps, that the water as an indication of a boundary.
Right.
It's either Diana moved into the pleroma, or the great emanation came through the boundary from the high holy heaven down into this lower dimensional world, into her heart.
God, I love that.
It was really...
You must, I mean, you guys are so lucky to have each other.
I know.
I mean, because like he gets to, you're like, yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So many times, and I'll be just saying something,
Right.
oh, and then this happened, and they'll be like, well, that's,
I could tell Dan's like experiencing it with you though, the way he
yes,
speaks of it as well.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so on the Gothic cathedrals, there are these waves that are the, and it marks boundaries in these these illustrations, these sculptures on the front of these early Gothic cathedrals. It's a prominent theme. And of course, I don't know, it's like it goes into God seeing, the image, man in the waters. It's in the Old Testament. But the Gnostic tradition sort of brings much more focus and clarity in terms of what the waters mean, particularly this idea of the 13th aeon as a boundary between the high regions of purer zones of light and the region in which Sophia came in what it seems to be her process of seeding this lower region with vessels, creating vessels, physical beings, a species perhaps, in which children of the light, these high holy beings can reside, can come into this dimensional reality.
Okay.
So
See, that's why I think it's important for you guys to teach this, talk about this. I'm hoping that you're going to write a book together and talk about this. I mean, please do. But I mean, because this is the thing. People can go and read, and it can be very dark, the things they read, or it could be very confusing. Very, very confusing, very foreign, right? It hasn't been touched by a gazillion kings and popes and many people. It's very hard to read, and you can go all kinds of crazy places with Priestess Sophia specifically, and actually even, the Apocryphon of John. I mean, many of the text. So, which I was thankful to have Dan on, because I'm thinking, what in the heck? Jesus is talking some crazy shit in here about, But obviously Mary Magdalene was a huge part of the story also, another one, her story hidden, her story, absolutely fabricated into whatever it's been. I mean, my mom recently, just last year, I still thought Mary Magdalene was a prostitute.
wow.
And so, yeah. And so we tell the story, well, we just relate to what we've been told, so it was really hard. It's hard to read the Gnostic Gospels from a Catholic perspective. I think maybe if I even didn't have a Catholic background, it would have been easier for me to read those and had received them differently.
They're so damned, I mean, they're the heresies. They're the ones that put the word heresy on the map, in second, third century. And even the word Gnostic is just, it's just sort of makes people curdle, and they don't even know why. And yet Gnosis, is the word that really is the seed, word meaning kind of inner knowing or coming to an awareness through not just mental process, but through feeling and intuition or connection with the divine. And in my book, I do work to try to bushwhack my way through Christian history to get to where it appears that the Gnostic system was probably more original, closer to the original teachings of Christ, that became packaged and developed in the Orthodox system in the late first century, and of course, the second and third centuries. And you can see how it was shaped by the heresiologists, and where Peter became the primary anchor and focus for the Orthodox tradition, and that they marginalized anything having to do with Sophia, having to do with Gnosis, having to do with the unknown God. And it was a campaign to essentially cut out anything that would compromise and interfere with the Orthodox system. That was what we know. Jesus was this simple carpenter, and born in a manger, and had no education, and he had 3 years of ministry, and then he died and was crucified and wrote all of it. That's a story we've inherited that has a lot of significance and a lot of meaning. And yet it appears that there's a whole lot going on. And I think we have to grow to step out, to become more mature and not just rely on these simpler tales that have been packaged for us.
100%. So what I think is beautiful is, Diana, you've received. I mean, you didn't seek any of this either. So I think it's very amazing, that it's a lot like my journey. I didn't seek any of it either, but you've received these beautiful gifts of how you can use this Gnosis and
I've always personally loved the word Gnosis. If other people it scares, I'd be like, oh, I love that word.
And I have beef with Peter. I totally have beef with Peter. I got to use my voice and say that.
Nice.
But, you did an attunement, in the class that I was in, you and Dan's class. And I mean, I was taken out of my body. I mean, but I could just listen to you and go out and go there as well. I don't know how Dan stays conscious with you.
Well, maybe we can, I don't know, like it really is about the energetic, and we want to hold the space for the energetic. And maybe we can just take a moment.
Yes.
The gathering of voices is music to my ears. Speaking me into existence, into hearts, by just saying my name. Being willing to be courageous and brave and ruffle feathers to bring me to my children. My children who have been orphaned intentionally. They are beginning to hear one by one. They are becoming aware of what's been lost. To humanity. And to see how it became possible to get so out of balance. You are each here, and those listening, doing your part, answering my call. Even though it may not seem like a huge undertaking at this moment, the implications are unfathomable. This will be a huge piece of bringing humanity back into balance within themselves, with each other, with the planet. And it is a very high calling. my blessings and love and flame on each of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So much wind. I don't know if you guys heard it. Like so much that my door was shaking, my curtains.
Oh, wow.
And then like as you came to an end, it got very still and I was like, what is going on? And then, you know what came to my mind, Diana?
What?
Was there's a storm brewing.
Oh, wow. Yes.
There is a thunderstorm brewing.
Yes. And you know, my thunder experience, I think I've shared that,
Yeah.
right? And we also did have another experience of having rain that wasn't present on towards the end of a podcast that we were in another.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, I shared that with you. Yeah. So that's
was a
just
sound.
that's how she, yeah. I mean, it sounded like rain or a rain stick, maybe, you know, that we get varying degrees of softness and heaviness.
Sound wasn't able to be edited out.
Yes, yes. Person editing had all kinds of equipment and is very used to this, could not get it out.
So and this is the Revelation
Project with Monica Rogers.
But
Right.
what is the connection between, well, you know, of course, Thunder Perfect Mind, which is one of my favorite scriptures ever. Is there other references or what is the connection between, you know, because I after you guys, we talked about this in your class, I thought back, there were some crazy thunderstorms that were happening that entire first year of me discovering Sophia, but I didn't know anything about it, the connection,
Right.
until other people start talking about it. Because Monica, she also had an experience with thunder,
Right.
a thunderstorm.
So yeah, I think if I had an experience with a thunderstorm, I probably would have never even thought to mention it. I was on a personal silent retreat at an ashram. I was actually Sri Aurobindo and the mother's ashram here. They have a small one here in California. And there's 4 hours of work a day and then plenty of time to read and study all their teachings and everything. And so that night, it was right like pretty much at the stroke of midnight. I hear like the loudest thunder you could ever hear. And I hear a voice say, "She is here." And then I hear, "You are embodied." And then there were a few other things, you know, personal to me. But the next day, I did break my silence because I was like, this storm was so crazy. Like, it's crazy. The other people weren't necessarily in silence. I'm like, nobody's talking about this. And they're like,
Weird.
what storm?
What storm?
What storm? And I was like, okay. That was a whole other thing. Yeah.
So they didn't hear the thunder.
The thunder,
it
yeah.
was just this. So yeah, I wonder if we can actually just mention, like, what is your, like, how do you receive the message? How does Sophia's voice come to you? Do you call it channeling?
Oh, yeah. So I've never liked the term channeling. So this is another interesting thing because I do feel like she's here and yet she's here. So I think I mentioned this before to you, but I feel like it's what the French would call a tête-à-tête. It's a conversation and it's also like I'm kind of, it's hard to say. It's coming through me and yet like, so I get out of the way to what's wanted to be said. And then, but I did pray before we got on here that I be open to whatever she's wanting.
Yeah.
So it's not an overriding of
Right.
her own will or her own voice. It's very much of it seems like Sophia is very gentle and sensitive to Diana having her own voice.
Right.
And that Sophia can come through Diana, but it's not, and she comes and goes, and it's not like she can just sort of, okay, I'm going to channel Sophia right now. You know, it's kind of not quite like that. And so it's more subtle and it's more beautiful because I think because it's honoring Diana's work in the world and it's not wanting to drown that out with this big channeling thing.
Yeah. So
but it's so beautiful.
It feels very more integrated, I'll say.
So awesome. I remember the first time I talked to Dan, he mentioned, he was like, you got to meet this lady, Diana. He's like, because, she has experienced, this in a different way, in a spiritual way, much like you have. I often have said that I didn't have much experience of my own beliefs when I was younger. But the one thing I did remember experiencing was like in church before, like when you feel the Holy Spirit come through. And now I really truly believe Sophia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe, Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
She is.
That Trinity probably more likely came out of the Gnostic tradition. The Gnostics talk about the Trinity far more than the Bible. There's one very slight reference to the Trinity in the Bible. But in the Gnostic cosmology, the Holy Spirit is equated with pronoia, of the thought. Pronoia means sort of thought, that is coming from mind, the masculine. And the Holy Sophia, the Holy Spirit, the dove, and Sophia, the high Holy Sophia, seem to all sort of correspond to each other. Sophia can be a beacon and a guide and a support and a focus of anchoring ourselves outside of the archonic system. That's certainly one thing. But we don't want to lose ourselves in the way we have for the last 3,000 whatever years. We give our power over to some deity out there, Actually, this is the incredible part of this cosmology is that we have within us this spark, which is latent. It's somehow it's concealed. It's somehow it's in potential, and we are being called to give fuel to that, to blow air onto that spark. And this spark is the light of the High Holy Spirit, the great emanation, the pronoia. And the miracle is that we do have this, but according to the Gnostic system, it's we've been shrouded from that. We've been told we don't have it, and it's a threat. No, power is within, and yet it's in our humble relationship to Source that we can also hold to the inner light and bring those two into sort of sympathetic resonance. And that's where we can begin to sort of access the wisdom within in a greater way.
Yeah. There's no dogma. There's no one book. There's no, I see. I'm totally feeling what you're saying, Dan. And thank you for saying that. We don't want to go right back into giving it all the way to a book or many books or one God or one priest or priestess, because the whole message is to find the divine spark within.
Right. Yeah.
There's a beautiful quote from Jung about insofar as we're not able to essentially own our divine child self, that child self. Insofar as we're not able to bring that into ourselves, we need to project it outwards. And even if it takes, 2,000 years of projection onto the Christ child, that we need to bring that in. We need to draw our projection of the divine figure of Christ, Mary Magdalene or whoever, whatever divinity we lose our power to, and yet of course we Mary Magdalene is a wonderful mentor. It's not against her at all. It's incredible. She's bringing so much to our culture now, from
much more than Peter.
Yes. Exactly.
He picked on her in the Gnostic Gospels, okay? A lot.
Oh,
Dan, tell everybody where they can get your book, because it's definitely worth getting. If anyone is curious, it's a great, well-rounded book for information when it comes to the history and for the love of Sophia.
So probably the best just central receiving area website is sophiaproject.net. Sophia, Sophia, project.net. And that's my main webpage. And on that, you can have links to the book. You can get my book through Amazon, or you can order it through local booksellers. And then there's lots of articles on the webpage that refer to sort of background research articles that relate to the book, and also a blog and events and things. So,
yeah, or events or other things that we're doing, classes. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you how sad I was when our class was over. I was like, and how at peace I felt. But that's the energy of Sophia, is that home feeling, the feeling that I'm sure, and I hope our listeners just felt, that you brought forth in that space. And Dan, you always hold this space for Diana and for Sophia so very strongly. And I freaking love you both so much. It's not even funny. I feel so fortunate to be able to know you and to call you up if I have any weird questions about doves or whatever.
That's sweet.
Diana, where can they find you? And if someone wanted to work with you, or if someone wanted to learn more about the things that you do, where can they go?
So lightofthesophia.com is my website. And I do work with people individually, doing, mentoring, spiritual mentoring, healing. I do a lot of
the womb chakra healing.
Yes, womb chakra. I've been to India, received things there, Thailand. So, yes.
But her sweet spot,
sweet spot, yeah.
Is energy healing work.
Yeah.
And she does it online as well as in person. And she works with people in recovery.
Yes.
And very powerful healing activations, and the ampula and the crowning ceremony that she does is very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
You guys are so neat. So fun. Can you imagine your conversations?
Oh, they are very
amazing. Well, I'm glad that Sophia brought you two together.
And just that actually there's very few people that we really fully connect with around Sophia. And when we talk about it, your name is right there at the top of the list.
Yeah.
You're so, your own personal journey with her, and also your work with your Patreon podcast collection.
Yeah.
And your journey is tremendous.
Absolutely.
And we would really, encourage people to turn to you for inspiration and insight into Sophia.
Yeah.
Oh my goddess, thank you so much for being with me.
It's been a pleasure. It's fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Yay.
Yes.
All right. Love you both.
Okay. Love you
so
too.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Sense of Soul podcast. And thanks to our special guests for joining me. If you want more of Sense of Soul, check out my website at www.mysenseofsoul.com, where you can work with me one-on-one or help support Sense of Soul podcast by donating to my coffee fund. Thanks for listening.